Alright guys, so I actually got a little bit of very rare good news here for y'all. Lest you think this channel is only about documenting ongoing war crimes, atrocities, and genocide, it's actually also about weed. So here's the latest from the Associated Press. The U.S. Drug Control Agency will move to reclassify marijuana in a historic shift. So what are they talking about here? They say the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration will move to reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug. It's currently up there on Schedule 1 with drugs like heroin and LSD, right? So they're bumping it down. They say the Associated Press has learned a historic shift to generations of American drug policy that could have wide ripple effects across the country. The DEA's proposal, which still must be reviewed by the White House Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB, would recognize the medicinal uses of cannabis and acknowledge it has less potential for abuse than some of the nation's most dangerous drugs. However, it would not legalize marijuana outright for recreational use. They say once the OMB signs off, the DEA will then take public comment on the plan to move marijuana from its current classification as a Schedule 1 drug alongside heroin and LSD, and it moves it to Schedule 3 alongside ketamine and some anabolic steroids following recommendation from the Federal Health and Human Services Department. After public comment period and a review from administrative judges, the agency would eventually publish the final rule. Okay, so what are we supposed to take from this, right? Obviously, number one, on a substantive level, marijuana should not be on the controlled substance list, okay? It should be regulated in the same way that alcohol is, for example. And we know by any metric, alcohol is far more dangerous than marijuana is. So it shouldn't even be part of this scheduling system. So they're bumping it down from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. This will have some benefits in terms of easing up some of the regulations, in terms of allowing for more research to be done into marijuana. But as they pointed out there, it's not going to legalize it at the federal level, which is really effectively what should have been done a long time ago. And there are, half the country, half the states in the United States, I think it's 24 at this point, have recreational weed already legalized. It's a vast majority of the states that have medicinal marijuana that has been legalized at this point. So the federal government is really just lagging behind significantly where the American people are. It's a vast majority that support legalizing recreational marijuana, and also where the states are. So this is kind of like a classic Biden move here, where it's like, okay, I'll give you a little bit of a round of applause here for taking a step in the right direction, but also you're not really going the full extent that you could. Okay, this is not where we should be. This is not the end point, right? So there are still going to be hurdles. There are still going to be, issues surrounding this being on Schedule 3, but at least it's not on Schedule 1 anymore, right? So I guess there's a little bit of a benefit to that. Now, while we're on the topic of some good news, because I usually only get the chance to make like 1 or 2 videos of a day, and usually because I think of the gravity of the situation in Gaza, it tends to be coverage on that. So I'm just going to kind of lump in a couple other positive stories into this one so that we can mention these and not let them fall into the background, basically. But so we had this happen just a couple of days ago. The U.S. banned non-compete agreements for nearly all jobs. So shout out to Lena Khan, the head of the FTC, who is probably the single brightest spot of Joe Biden's entire administration so far. She has been going after large corporations, whether it's Apple or Amazon or other monopolistic entities in the United States. She has been going after them. She has been trying to deploy antitrust policies against them, and she's been doing a great job, honestly. Okay, so this is like one of those areas where if you want to ask me what's the difference between Biden and Trump, it's shit like this, okay? So U.S. bans non-compete agreements. So what are non-compete agreements? They're basically contracts or portions of contracts that employers have their employees sign that essentially say, if you end up getting fired or if you end up leaving this company for a certain period of time, you are banned from going and getting hired at a place that does something similar, right? Now, this isn't just to like protect trade secrets or whatever, right? You have some high-level software engineer and he works at Google, and you don't want him to just leave Google to go to, whatever, Apple, and then share some of your software information or whatever the case may be. This extended down to textbook working class people. Like, as a part of this case that she was bringing, or this argument that she was making, she cited examples where like Jimmy John's workers, the sandwich shop, were being forced to sign non-compete agreements, right? As if like somebody who's making sandwiches at the local Jimmy John's is going to walk across over to Subway, and that's going to be in some way, shape, or form a threat to the Jimmy John's enterprise, right? So it's a totally ridiculous standard that was in place. And honestly, even from a capitalist perspective, it still didn't make sense, because this is a massive wrench inside of the so-called like free labor market, right? You can't say you have a free market when it comes to labor if companies are literally allowed to hold their workers hostage so that they can't go and work for companies that they are in competition with, right? And so there's even a strong pro-capitalist argument to make against non-compete agreements, as well as a pro-worker argument to make in favor of non-compete agreements. So this is absolutely fantastic. Again, nothing but good news here. We also had this. Biden administration expands overtime pay to cover 4.3 million more workers, okay? So basically, this rule that the Biden administration put into place, it ups the threshold of who is qualified to get overtime pay, right? So you work more than 40 hours, the standard 40-hour work week. Every hour that you work above that, you deserve overtime pay. But there are specific standards that are in place on how much you make in salary every year that determine whether or not you qualify for that 1.5 time overtime pay, right? And so basically they say this: the U.S. Department of Labor on Tuesday unveiled a new rule that will extend overtime pay to salaried workers who earn less than $1,128 per week, or $58,000 roughly annually. Previously, only workers who made around $35,000 annually were eligible for overtime. So you took, $35,000 as the threshold and bumped it up to $58,000. So now anybody who's making less than $58,656 per year is going to now be eligible for overtime pay for any time that they work over 40 hours. So again, as I pointed out in the headline up here, this is going to give millions of Americans, a pay rise. So again, one of the small good things that has happened over the last number of weeks. Now, we have these small little changes that are happening that are positive in the right direction in some ways, even though they don't go remotely far enough, and they're half measures. But with these kinds of stories, the real question here to me is, on top of who is this actually going to benefit, what are going to be the results from this, it's also how does this play out politically? So, the marijuana issue, overwhelmingly popular, obviously. The FTC non-compete agreement, I think, is also overwhelmingly popular, although I don't really know how many Americans know what non-compete agreements are, unless you happen to have one or it's come up in some other way in your life. So I don't know how salient of an issue that will be for the November election coming up. But then you look at the polling data, right? So the real question is how much are small things like this going to sway people in Biden's favor in November? So, this is just some of the latest polling here. This was from CNN. President Trump leads Biden 49% to 43% in a two-way race. And President Trump, again, leads Biden 42% to 33%. So an even wider gap there if you include third-party candidates. And I don't even really know why they're doing polling that's just head-to-head and doesn't have third-party candidates, because you are going to have third-party candidates. So, why even do the head-to-head matchups? But anyways, they say 55% say the Trump presidency was a success, Jesus Christ, and 39% say that the Biden presidency is a success. So, listen, obviously I don't think the Trump administration was a success by any metric. His biggest accomplishment was giving a massive tax cut to billionaires and corporations, but I think that a lot of this is kind of recency bias, where people are dealing with Joe Biden as the president right now. They're not happy either with his ongoing support for a genocide, or they're not happy with their own financial situation, or whatever the case may be. And so because he's the president right now, of course, deservingly so, he's going to get the blame. Whereas Trump hasn't been in power for a few years. People are kind of forgetting the chaos, the horrible nature of his presidency. And so he gets a little bit of a bump. Maybe people are a little bit more nostalgic or look back on it with more favorable eyes, whatever the case may be, right? So anyways, the polling is not looking good for Biden. That's the final, the final characterization of polling data like this. We also have other polls like this from CBS News, finds Biden-Trump race tight in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So, listen, at this point, we can look at a million different polls in a million different directions, My take on this is it's just a coin flip. We don't know. I see polls every couple of days that show Biden up by 3, and then polls the next day show Trump up by 6, or Biden up by 1 and Trump up by 2. It's all over the place. Okay, so we're still months out. We don't know what kind of political dynamics are going to be at play. Anything could change between now and November. We don't know who's going to win. But, I'll show you one more polling data, and then I'll give you my final conclusion on this. This was amazing. A Gallup poll has shown that Joe Biden is the least popular president at this point in his presidency in the past 70 years. 70 years. So my final conclusion is that, number one, we don't know who's going to win in November. If I had to guess, it's a 50-50, but I'd probably lean that I think Biden is going to lose. But again, that's kind of like I'm splitting hairs at that point. But my real final conclusion is this. I think that it is absolutely pathetic in two different ways that we are left with Trump and Biden as our choices. The first way is these are two massively unpopular candidates, okay? Some of the least popular candidates that we have ever had in American history, okay? And I mean that individually, right? Biden is a historically unpopular candidate. Trump is a historically unpopular candidate. We're getting the worst of both worlds in that sense. So it's depressing in that sense that out of a country of 330 million people, these two jackasses are the best that we can come up with. We have Joe Biden, who's senile, who's supporting a genocide, who does some good things around the edges, granted, but overwhelmingly people have been disappointed and are not happy with his presidency. And then on the other hand, we have Donald Trump, who is like the most brazen and obvious criminal con man in American history, right? And these are the two options that we get. So that's the first way. The second takeaway for me is that how pathetic is it that Democrats going up against a candidate like Donald Trump, a guy who is facing like 90 different criminal charges at the moment, even though those cases may not play out until after the November election already takes place. In fact, right now it looks like the only case that's going to actually happen before the November election is going to be the worst case out of the bunch, the Stormy Daniels one, which is the one that's ongoing right now. So you have this historically weak candidate like Donald Trump, okay? And the best that you can do is a coin flip. The best that you can do is polling data that's all over the place. How do you not look at the modern Republican Party, whose main priority is like pushing Christian nationalism, talking about how everything is woke, everything is a conspiracy by the woke, mind virus-ladled communists, and that's the state of their party, giving tax cuts to corporations and billionaires, wanting to go to war with every fucking country on the map. An absolutely pathetic, empty agenda. And the best that you can do is Joe Biden. The best that you can do is a coin flip as to whether or not you're going to beat that guy. I mean, it is just so depressing, right? I know that said that this was a positive story, but it is genuinely just depressing to finish off here, getting back to my normal self, because there's such an opportunity. There is such an energy that we kind of saw spark up with Bernie Sanders in 2016, and especially in 2020. And even with Donald Trump back in 2016 as well, he kind of latched on to the same phenomenon of this longing, this deep want from the American people to get real, bold, structural change in this country, right? Obviously, Trump didn't follow through on anything that materially helped working class people, but Bernie Sanders captured that energy, right? And I'm not trying to rehash the primary or whatever the fuck. I'm just saying that, like, there is an opportunity there for a candidate who is a left-wing economic populist who would become the most popular president since FDR. And instead of doing that, Democrats are choosing to go in the opposite direction. They are choosing to try to cozy up to the right as much as they can. They're calling out the left as if we're the problem with the Democratic Party and not these massively corrupt corporate Democrats. And we just have the same exact narratives playing out over and over and over again. And if Biden loses this election, guess who's going to get blamed? It's not going to be Biden for supporting a months and months and months long genocide. It's going to be us. It's going to be the left that gets blamed by the media, by politicians, by the establishment broadly. They are going to blame us for their failures. And so in that sense, it is depressing. Now, on the same hand, at the same time, again, we do have a couple of different positive news stories here, so I do want to update you guys that it's not all completely horrible in the world right now. But anyway, stay tuned, like, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff, and tomorrow we will be back with our regularly scheduled updates on the absolute horror coming out of the Middle East.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying